Excuse me?
Bar, press Control Alt E.
And what does that do for us?
As for hiding that bar in the middle. Oh, I got it.
Oh, okay.
Because if not, you are going to record it.
So, is it still running then for sure?
Yep.
Yep. Looks like it. Yeah.
Oh, there it is. Okay, great. Okay, so it's February 2018. We've got a new employee group here. We're getting ready to start a demo of a project from start to finish. So here we go. Okay, so you guys mentioned that you would like to start from nothing. So you're receiving a topo, or you essentially turned in a survey request. And so in ProjectWise, I threw a survey request out here somewhere. And have all of you or any of you filled out a survey request before?
No.
Yes.
So
Kind of. Not completely. Because I am working on it.
Is it the hard copy on CAD? The survey request?
the survey request?
On CAD or
It's
the regular hard copy that you normally send to CAD, to survey?
Yeah, to Brad Duzan in surveys. Yep. And so here's the memo. Looks like this is an old one. It says Laura Malachnik. It's Sharon Hases now is over land acquisition, but ultimately it's being sent to Brad, and you just need to tell him what you need. Most likely you're going to need the alignment in nearly all cases. Sometimes, if you have just a real basic, simple project that has no earthwork whatsoever, you might just need the topo with no DTM, no digital terrain model, or you might need the DTM. Usually it's a combination of both. It's a combination of, I've got this resurfacing job, but it has these spot improvements of I need to cut a couple cross sections here and there. That's probably most typical of what we do. And so you just fill this out, try to explain to him what it is that you want. Sometimes I'll go into a CAD file and actually put a circle or polygon around the area that I want. He usually wants a location map. Think of it this way, in some way you need to communicate to them exactly what area it is that you want and what the limits of that survey is. And you usually also want to take into account, if there's a decent chance that the survey is going to be extended in one direction or the other, you might want to let him know that up front, because they may choose to go ahead and pick that up while they're there rather than go back and do a pickup survey. And so you do that, you get your request in. Over a little bit of time, he'll come back to you and have the topo file for you. And sometimes it's a little bit of a combination of things. Sometimes you might have a situation like Tina just had recently, where they needed a survey on 72, but they also wanted to show the overhead structure and the side road. They might not be doing any work in that area, but they wanted to be able to show it. And so, of course, CAD's been around for a long time now, so we have a lot in CAD already. So usually you can go to the archive file, I should say folder, and then if you hit description over here, in most all the projects start with the route number. So you can usually find what you're looking for there. If it goes back, more than 10, 15 years, I forget what the time frame is, there's some folders in here that have some year ranges. So you might be able to find it that way also. Take a look for yourself, see if you can find it. If you can't find it right away, just come see me, and I'll help you find whatever it is that you're looking for. We've got an access database that helps us locate some of the older stuff. If you go into GIS or just looking at old plans and you happen to know the section number, you know the old D number, something like this, we can do a search on it, and we can usually find it fairly easy. But of course, like I said, anytime, just come see Brad or myself, and we can help you find whatever it is you're looking for. Okay, so let's get back to our project. Of course, most projects are in the projects folder. We're going to be working in miscellaneous just because this is more of like a class-like setting, but of course, here's our projects folder. All the folders are by contract number. Some things to know, just to talk a little bit about ProjectWise first. I think most of you have used ProjectWise a little bit so far, so I'm sure you're well aware of this, but ProjectWise is a project document software. It basically keeps track of all the files. So the way that it works is when you're working on a CAD file, what it's going to do, it's going to go out to the CAD server and it's going to download that file to your machine. So if I look here in the design folder, if I can either double click on that file name and it's going to open that file, but it's really doing two things. It's opening it, but it's also first copying it locally to your machine. So you can either get that file locally to your machine that way, or if you have a whole group of files that you know that you're going to be working on that you want on your machine, you can also right click on it and you can say check out this file. And check out does just what it says. It copies that file locally to your machine, and when that happens, then it prevents anybody else from checking out the file and making edits to it. They can open the file as read-only, but as long as you have it checked out, they can't make a change to it. Now, it used to be where you had larger squads, and so you had multiple people in your squad working on a project, and so a lot of this was probably more important because it was always a concern as to, okay, who's making an edit to this file and who's not, and so this allowed the other person to still copy it out or open it as read-only and still view the file. They just couldn't make edits to it, that sort of thing. We're in the process now of going with the new ProjectWise. We've had this for many, many years. The new ProjectWise, it's coming out in a couple months, is going to look real similar to this. It's really not going to change things too much from a user perspective, but the back end is going to be completely different. Rather than these files be locally on our CAD server, all the files are going to be out of the cloud. So it's just like everything else. It's not just CAD. It's like GIS, any technology. Just like, we had Office 365 loaded on our machines recently, and it came with OneDrive. So everything's going to the cloud. And from a CAD perspective, why that's so important is because the direction we're going with things is to give construction more electronic data, allow construction to have access to all this. I guess you'd call it rich data. Instead of just the hard copy plans that all you have is what you get, it'd be so much more useful if you guys, when you go to construction, had access to these files. And that can much more easily happen if the files are out of the cloud. It's just much easier to get access to them. There's less restrictions.
Basically, someone from Studies and Plan can check it out, save it, and send it through email, for example.
Right now, that's
for construction guys.
Today that's the way it works. I think you can a couple ways. You can right click on the file. We have a couple ways of getting it to construction. I can go to send to. I don't see. It used to be an option right here. We might not be able to do it direct any longer. Usually, though, what you'll do is a link. Well, you could send a link if if it's internal, but if you're out in construction,
You don't have access.
you most likely would not have access to it that way. what you would need to do is you gather up all your files, and you would export the files out of ProjectWise. So if I right-click on a file, and again, if you're getting ready to do this with a grouping of files, you come see me if you like on this. If you feel comfortable, you can do it yourself. Either way. But just right-click on it. We say export. And we always want to use this bottom one, send to folder.
Do you still have the transfer folder that they used to create?
Yeah, and that's one other option. So I'll finish this one, then I'll show you what Savella's talking about is called Project Exchange.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so we're going to go next. We're going to point to the path where we want to export it to, hit next, and it's going to copy the files into that folder. Now, once they're in that folder, then you got a couple options as to how you can get it to somebody in construction or a consultant or anybody else. Usually, if it's a consultant, all of our consultants have access to what Stella was talking about, and that is Project File Exchange right here. And this is within ProjectWise. Our consultants can get access to just this location only through a browser. They have to send in a request, and they get permission set up to get access to this. But you can see each consultant has their own folder. And so if you're working on a consultant project, and usually you always have files going back and forth, and what you can do is you just dump the files here. You can actually just drag and drop the files from your folder into your consultant's folder. And contact the consultant, let them know they're available, and vice versa. They'll call you or email you to let you know that, hey, we just dropped some files out there for you. Wasn't going to go too far into ProjectWise because I know most of you have used it so far. Is there anything in regards to ProjectWise that you want to talk about before we really get into the CAD aspect? I guess we could talk a little bit about standards. So we've already talked about, mainly you're going to be working out of the projects folder in your contract number. Let's see. Let me talk about one other thing. Maybe permissions we could talk about a little bit. Okay, so normally the template for a contract is set up this way. You got CAD data, consultant data. These are the two folders that you're using for the most part. The consultant data is going to be read-only to you. Usually what you're going to do in that case, especially if, I think, I'd have to check into this to be certain. I think you guys can drag and drop files to Project Exchange, but I'm not sure that you can come back and copy a file to the consultant data folder. If you can't, just let me know, and I'll get that for you. It seems like most people ask me to do that, and so I think that's how permissions is set up with that. As far as permissions as it pertains to the CAD data folder, you'll see that all of our sections have their own folder. And so with you guys being in design, of course, you guys have read-write privileges for anything in the design folder, but then you have access to all these other CAD files. Geometrics, you're going to use that often. Some with hydraulics, definitely with land ac, surveys, traffic signal plans. So you're going to be using most all of these. So far, we haven't really used construction. Really hasn't used that folder too often yet in this district, anyway.
Do we create all those folders, or who create them?
No, they're actually created for you. What happens is when you guys request a job number from Betty, and then I'll go out and I'll put a template out there. Either that, or sometimes you'll have to get started on a project before you even have a job number assigned because it's so early. And in that case, you can come ask me if I could put a folder out there, and we'll call it temporary in the name. I'll show you an example of that. If we scroll down towards the bottom, we see that there's quite a few temporary projects out there. Usually those projects are projects that are not in the multi-year program. And so they're so far out, but there's something that's driving that project that we still need to get going on it. Usually there's an expectation that it's going to get moved up into the multi-year program and we want to get started on it. But if the project's out far enough, then those projects usually aren't a priority to get job numbers for. So we have a temp, and then once the job number is created, then I just go here and I rename it. But I could show you what I do on my end to make that happen if you like. I just go to my standards folder, and I've got a folder here that I don't think you guys have access to. It's called templates. And so it's going to look just like what you're used to seeing. CAD Data, Consultants, see it's got all those same folders. When you open up that folder, it has all these blank files in there for you. And the reason for that is that we use, IDOT uses a standard file naming convention. And it's just so much easier for you guys if you don't have to, every time you want a file, go out and find a seed file and then copy it here and then name the file. And then you'd be like, well, I don't remember exactly what the naming is supposed to be. And this is an area that we want to be consistent. And the reason is because most likely the project you start on, you're not going to finish. It just, projects happen over, usually, not all, some happen relatively quick, others over an extended period of time. So we want somebody else to be able to go into your job and just take off at any point in time, and they can look at your files and they know, hey, the proposed is located in the design folder, and vice versa. That also works with our consultants, and that kind of leads me to talking about the new CAD manual. If you guys haven't checked it out yet or had access to it or whatever. Actually, being I'm here, let me jump back to that. Let's finish off in standards before we move to where I've got a copy of the CAD manual. While we're here, there's a folder called Design Standard Details. And what these are what we call our district standards, or you'll hear them called district details, CAD standards. We call them a few different things. But what the intent of using these are, and every district has their own standard. So as I'm sure you know that when you're developing plans, oftentimes there's details that get used over and over and over again, and some of those details are statewide, and so those are highway standards. So the Bureau of Design and Environment keeps track of those. They draft those, they keep those updated, and whenever possible, we use highway standards for details. All of our contractors are used to seeing those. They've been used over and over and over again, so they work out great statewide. But every district then also kind of has their own way of they like to do things, so to speak, or maybe there just isn't a statewide highway standard that exists. So they create their own district detail and standard, and that's what these are. Now, we're kind of in the process of updating these. Recently, when we went to Annotation, our sheets changed. So actually, Chris, that's what's his last name, Greamer, I think. He's the guy who's transferred down to District 8, and Tina. Those two went out and they replaced all the sheet borders on the CAD standards. And then what else did you do, Tina?
Eliminated metric and updated the fonts.
Yeah, we just, recently our fonts changed to some fonts that are what's called a true type font. And so they did that. So those are still located in a separate folder. I'm going to go through and review those, and then also have the project engineers review those. So in addition to like the drafting changes, I want to see if the project engineers also want to make any design changes to them. That's, like I said, that's happening now. We're kind of in the process of doing that. And when that happens, we'll replace all these standards with, so it'll mostly be the same standard, but maybe with some updates. And eventually we want to go through these because I think there's still quite a few of these that we no longer use them too often. Maybe there's a highway standard now that gets used instead of these. But there's some of these that get used on a very regular basis. And I would say the most common one is probably like the entrance standards. And there's a very high likelihood that you've already used it or you'll be using it soon. I would say this one right here, right now, is probably the most common district detail that we use. So it's in here. We can open it. It's a district detail for resurfacing projects, for 3P projects, and it handles both entrances and side roads. So any questions so far while we're waiting for this to come out? Or anything you want to say? Were you guys all aware of this, the CAD standards? That they're out there? Have you used them or
Yes.
no? So some yes, some no? And then in addition to those district details, there's also quite a few details over there that tend to get used over and over, which will most likely become a district detail. And one example of that would be the interstate details. There's a ton of interstate details that we don't have as CAD standards, and what happens is that we just keep reusing those over and over. It's like you'll get started on a project and you'll know that there was another project done just recently very similar to your project, and so you'll reference in that project and copy the details in from that project if you can't find them in a CAD standard. And some examples of that would be like the emergency median crossover turnaround. Over the last few years, we've been adding what's essentially a turn lane. We don't stripe them as turn lanes, but on the interstate, if either our people or state police or whoever is going to turn into those emergency turnaround areas, we don't want them having to slow down right in the middle of the passing lane and get rear-ended. So we're just making the shoulder wider at those locations so they can get off the interstate before they turn. So it's essentially a turn lane that's not striped as one. And that's just one example of a detail that I know exists that continues to get used over and over and over again. So I'm sure it will become a district detail fairly soon. But yeah, here's one very, very common: how to handle entrances. And like I said, we could spend all day talking about this job from a design standpoint, but we'll try to keep it more of a CAD thing. It's hard to separate the two, but on any project that you have to look at entrances, and you're especially looking at the entrance aprons. If you had a project that was resurfaced within probably the last 15 years, that entrance probably already has an apron. If it was done before that, if it does have an apron, it's not going to be to standard, and we're going to tear out that apron and we're going to put in a new one, which is kind of what this is showing right here. Otherwise, if one already exists, we're just going to overlay the apron just like we overlay the roadway. And then we're going to have to get it tied back in with some type of material, and usually that material type is whatever exists today. Like in a rural situation, which is mostly the case with our projects, we just need a wedge to get tied back into what's generally an aggregate entrance. There's a plan view detail of it. This is very typical. On rural jobs, we go back 15 feet with the total entrance. So from a CAD standpoint, and I don't think we have any entrances in this project we're going to look at today. Maybe we'll make one up just because it's so common, just so from a CAD standpoint, you know how that we would draft these in. And so if you look at this, what's happening is we're copying parallel either the stripe or the edge of pavement 15 feet back. And then we, on either a side road or an entrance, there's both minimum and maximum widths. And so, for example, on a private entrance, 12 feet's the minimum. So the way you draft this, knowing that, you know, oftentimes you might have a private entrance that's only 10 feet wide. Well, you're not going to go back on your theoretical distances and just match into existing, because there's a minimum of 12 foot. So what you do is you take the edge of pavement, you copy it parallel back 15 feet, and then from the center line, you know, center it up on the entrance, make it 12 foot wide, and then you can take that line and rotate it 45 degrees. You know, place your, you know, the edge of your apron here. And then, depending on if it's a commercial entrance or private entrance, we're going to pave part of that, and then the remainder is just going to be tying into the existing. So that's why you see this line right here. So let's see, where's our numbers? So for a private entrance, you're going to go back 8 foot with HMA, 7 foot with ag. Commercial entrance, you're going to go back 10 feet, and then only 5 foot with ag to get tied back in. So does that all make sense? I think most of you guys probably knew that. So, and give me some comments. If you think I'm getting too basic on some of the stuff, let me know, because I know that's pretty simplistic stuff. But if you're new to studies and plans, especially if this is your first rotation in studies and plans, you know, you might not know that. And I'm telling you, everything that we do is not difficult. This stuff is absolutely not difficult, but to me, the challenge, the difficulty, is the fact that there's so many little things to know that if you don't have something like this, like a class or somebody saying, you know, going over all this stuff with you, you will eventually figure out all these little things. It's just going to take time. And so hopefully, what I see us doing as a group coming together is speeding that time period up by getting you guys, you know, this information sooner than later. You would eventually figure this out. You would read the details. You'd figure it out yourself. You go talk to your squad leader. You would figure this out. It's not hard. It's just so many little things. And that's why I know I've heard some people say that, you know, with the rotation period, because there's so many little things to know, maybe your period in design maybe could be a little bit longer, especially if you're someone who hired in to work in construction for the most part. Then maybe you want your rotation to last longer in design. I don't know. So I'd definitely encourage you guys, though, to give those kind of comments that we bring these things up in our group, and I'll share those with management and everything. But I'd encourage you guys, too, to pass that along if you feel that way. Anything about the rotation program or anything else that you feel would make you a more productive employee, I would definitely pass that along, because otherwise we just keep doing the same things that we've done forever, over and over. Okay, let's drive on. Let's minimize this. What was it that we were going to cover too? I said, let me show you guys the details, and there was something else I wanted to show you before we got started. Can't remember what it was. Maybe we'll think of it later. Okay, so you're normally working out of the projects directory or pulling from the standard. let me show you one more thing while we're at standards, and that's maps. You guys are always going to be creating location maps. I can tell you that you'll find those maps here also under standards, maps. You got a couple different versions. Right now, probably the most up-to-date one is this one that says 2014. They're actually PDF files, but even though they're PDFs, you can still treat them like a raster file. You know, you can still bring those into CAD. And the most desirable map that you would use on your cover sheet is a county map. And the reason for that is because a county map has the sections. And over time, our route names can change. So many things can change, so it could be difficult to figure out where you're at in space. But one thing that will never change is the township and range and the section numbers. And we could go off on the tangent and go talking about that as well. I'm not going to go there right now. Maybe in a future class we can talk a little bit more about what township and range and sections are and all that sort of thing. But I guess for this purpose, from a CAD standpoint, just know that your number one choice would be to use a county map. If a county map does not work for you, then you might have to use a city map. Or we also have a district map for more of a various type project where you can just specify I'm working in a certain number of counties. Like Cloyd just recently had a guardrail project, and he had to go with not a very specific location, but more of a general location. Okay, let's get into miscellaneous. So for this, just for class purposes, in the miscellaneous folder, I threw out a class project. It's set up just like as if it was in the projects folder. And I think I called it training. Yeah, here we go. Okay. Now we're getting started, I guess, from a CAD standpoint. Well, other than just project-wise. You put in that survey request. You just found out that you received your topo. You're ready to go. So here we go. We are going to make an attempt today to take topo, run the project all the way through, profiles, cross-sections, plan sheets. We'll do as much as we can. Of course, we're not going to complete an entire job. We'll at least do like of one of everything, and to give you guys an idea of the process. And then when there's more of that type of work, there's, like I said, it's just more of it. So if we can at least get into a little bit of everything here, I think it'd be helpful. Okay, Brad, our Chief of Surveys, is going to put your topo file into the survey folder. And as of right now, we're in the process of making a change to the CAD manual. Oh, that's what I was going to show you now that I think of it. Our CAD manual, let me just go ahead and open this. I want to keep this running in the background. This is the CAD manual. It's called Computer-Aided Design, Drafting, Modeling, and Deliverables. Our consultants would heavily use this. Talks a little bit about not just the basic drafting type stuff, but setting up their environment and stuff. So it probably has really more information than what you need, but it is a good resource. It was just finished in April 2017, so just recently. They actually did a really good job on it, honestly. It's a very good manual in my opinion. They did a good job of talking about the fact that we're going to modeling, and they tried to kind of combine the way we're doing things today and the modeling, and I think they had a good mix. But we do have a little bit of a different file naming convention for surveys. Let's see. Oh. I think I was about there. Okay. this right here is, these are the sheet file naming conventions. So if you're ever if you need to create a new file and you did not have that template that had the file name created for you already, you'd probably want to look in the CAD manual to figure out what your file naming convention should be. And that's right here. A couple pages before that will be like the strip map type file naming. And so you'll see if we were to look at surveys, you'll see up here that these file names are a little bit different than what you're seeing today, right? This is the new file naming they're going to be using. The file that you're seeing today is a little different, and you'll probably see the old file naming convention for surveys for a while until we get through some of these projects. But from surveys, you're going to receive a topo file and an alignment file. With the older file names, where we go, you're going to see this, a file that ends in the letters GA and one in AL. And you can see over here in the description that that's your topo file. And so even for the next year or two, you're probably going to see a mix of survey files that say survey topo on them, and you're going to see a mix of this. So topos here. In Legacy Geopak, and that's what we're going to be talking about today. So keep in mind, everything that we do, I'm not talking about modeling. I'm not talking about the new software that we're going to next year, because nearly everything changes, okay? So keep in mind, everything we're talking about is what you're working on today, all of this year. What you'll probably be finishing up, you'll be using this sum less and less as time goes on. But today we're strictly talking about what's referred to as Legacy Geopak, the same software that we've used for 20 years. And in that Legacy software, we had a file called a TIN file. And that stands for Triangulated Irregular Network. It's a digital terrain model. It's a binary file. It's basically, we'll visualize it, and I'll show you exactly what I mean by it, but it's basically a combination of X, Y, and Z coordinates that are all triangulated that allows you to, at any point, select that file, and it will automatically interpolate the elevation and draft cross-sections and profiles and this sort of thing. Okay. So to get started, in your design file, you're going to have your own topo file. Even though surveys had a version, in our district at least, and this is about 50-50 throughout the district, some of the districts use the copy of topo in the survey folder. In our district, our designers have their own copy. And so normally when you get started on a job, you will have this in your design folder. You will have a topo file. If you don't have that, then you might have to do it, or you come to me. Either way, whatever you're comfortable with, and you would take and open up a seed file, a blank file, and you would merge in the topo from the surveys folder. And then from there, you guys could do some minor manipulations. Let's go ahead and get into that file. And when I say minor manipulation, what I'm talking about is something like, you're not going to be changing it a lot. Now, you're never going to go in and take and move, like, say, the edge of pavement or something like that. You know, the surveyors, they shot all this stuff. They picked it up, especially if it's coming from a survey. You never want to touch that or move that. Maybe if you're choosing to use the text that's in this file, maybe you want to pick up that text and move it over some. Or maybe, and this, again, you're going to see a little bit of mix about this. I just want to talk a few minutes about annotation. Okay, annotation is something new. When I say new, I mean like over the last couple of years at most. I'm going to say the last year. Yeah, maybe 1 year ago. Probably about the time the CAD manual came out, I'm going to say we went to fully being annotated. And what I mean by annotated is that when you work on a project, it's going to be a certain scale of project. It's either in most cases it's going to be a 20 scale, a 50 scale, or a 100 scale. It could be a 30 scale, it could be a 10 scale, 5 scale, it could be something else. The vast majority of the time it's going to be that way. And so before annotation, and the reason why I'm talking about this now, even though we use annotation today, I'm talking about this because you're going to run across still existing survey data that is not annotated. And that's why I want you guys to be familiar with both. And so let's look at a plan sheet. A plan sheet will help make it clear as to why or what it is, just what it is I'm talking about here. When I place this plan sheet, I'm gonna say this is 50 scale. Let's look at the difference. Excuse me?
I said the work project fit in that 50 scale.
Yeah.
You will not be able to see it.
Yeah, you see how zoomed out we are? Okay, now let's look at it to see if it was a 20 scale. And what would the difference be? Because when you're looking at different scales, we're talking about the sheet size being different. When you're drafting, you never have to worry about the scale necessarily. If the pavement's 12 foot wide, you're drafting it 12 foot wide. And that's different if you're talking about working sometimes with buildings or some other disciplines, maybe even structure plans in many cases, depending on what it is, the detail that you're working on. There are cases outside of the work that we do that they take into account that scale when drafting. Now, we don't do that. Everything we draw it makes it so much easier. If it's 12 foot, you draw it 12 foot. And on a plan sheet, what makes things appear to be larger when they're really not is the fact that the plan sheet's different. So imagine if I was to create a PDF or a plan sheet out of this, see how much larger that intersection is. So you can see it in a lot more detail. So depending on the type of work that you're doing, you have to make a determination early on in the project as to what scale that's going to be. And there's standards that we use. There's nothing that says you absolutely have to use a certain scale. Although, most often, what you'll find is that on interstate resurfacing projects, you're going to use a 100 scale. On 2-lane rural projects, you're going to use a 50 scale. And on urban projects, you're going to use a 20 scale, with most likely having even more detail than that for like an intersection detail sheet. That might even be like a 10 scale. And so all this kind of relates what I'm getting at with annotation and scales. And so what we did for the last 25 years until this year, when we placed our symbols, because most everything that we do is actual scale. When it comes to symbols like a power pole or any of a sign, most of the cells that we place are actually not drawn to although edge of pavement, shoulder, all those linear type elements, all that is drawn to scale. Some things, it would be so hard to see them if they weren't exaggerated. And so like things that are just a symbol, they're not saying this is like this power pole. We're not saying that power pole looks exactly, it's a square. It looks just like that. That's a symbol that represents a power pole. And so what you'll find are some non-annotated cells. So let me show you what I mean by that. You have three things that are annotated. You have line styles, you have cells, and you have text. And all these things are annotated. And so what annotation will do for you is it will visualize what you've drawn to look like anything in whatever file that you're in. And just because you set the annotation in one file doesn't mean it's going to affect the other file, right? So let's give an example of that. See, this is the annotation toolbar, I guess you call it, up here. So watch when I change this to 50. So see how that edge of the crop line here, the edge of the field, see how it changed? It's much larger.
The text as well.
Yes, in the text. Now, did you notice, though, that the cells did not change? Now, today, those cells would have changed, right? Because previously, that cell, you had to know what scale you're going to work at, and that cell had to be placed at a 50 scale. Now, the problem was that most jobs end up, especially at intersections, you'll have like a 50 scale sheet, a 20 scale, a 10 scale. Now you've placed this power pole. The power pole looks perfect on 50 scale, but it looks way too big on a 20 scale. Does that make sense? And so using this older project is probably a good example of that. Because when I set this up, what I did was I brought in this older file, and just like the cells, even the line styles weren't annotated. And so I was able to take an old survey and make it annotated by going to the IDOT menu pull down and selecting SS4 annotation macro. I ran that, and what that's doing, it's going out and it's making that non-annotated line style annotated, and then it's scaling it down to a size of 1. So if I was to set this at 1, it would look like that. So today and going forward, everything that we do is developed at a size of a 1. But it's annotated. And so what it allows us to do in any file is to come in here and set it to 1 inch equals 20. And what it's doing is it's visualizing. It's not changing that line style. It's not increasing it 600 times, 20 times 12 for 12 inches in a foot. It's not doing that. It's visualizing it 600 times larger. Or in this case, 240. I guess 50 scale would be 600 times larger. 20 scale is 240 times larger. Not that you need to know that. But just know that it's visualizing it different. But it didn't visualize the cells different. So what I can do in this case on this older survey is I could change the way that those non-annotated cells look. And what I would need to do is I would need to scale each one of these cells about their origin. Now that would take forever if I was to do each one individually. And so what I can do, because Brad and the survey crew, they never knew in the past what scale you were going to be using. So they used 50 scale for everything. So when you would get a project and if you knew that everything in your project was going to be 20 scale, you'd have to scale those cells up or down depending on what he gave you. And so let's figure out what size these are. Because today when we place a cell, I'll go ahead and place one here. Our cells today are the new cells that you place are annotated cells. So I'm going to go to existing, utilities. Oh, come on. Why? Maybe I need to zoom out here. What happened?
Just like
Oh, wow. What's up with that? Maybe it's the screen size I had to set for, the smartboard maybe. Okay, so power pole. See, it says 20 scale up there. So I can see
Yeah.
it's 20. So this one's annotated, that's not. So I'm going to change it to 50. It changed, but the other did not, right? And so that tells me that apparently when I set up this example for the class, I made these 20 scale. I probably, for class purposes, maybe, because we're going to end up ultimately using 20 scale. Let's still go over that, because you will definitely run into this over the next 2 years until we get all these projects completed that are started. So what I can do is I can go to my selector. I'm going to put everything into a selection set. And then I'm going to go to the IDOT menu pull down. And I'm going to select scale cells in either a fence or a selection set. And we know that those cells are 20 scale. Let's say I had a 50 scale job. How much do I need to scale these up? Does anybody know that? How much would I need? If it's 20 and I want it to be 50, what do you think the scale factor would be? 2.5. Yep. So, okay, we'll hit OK. I should have been zoomed in so you could see it, but you can tell. See how it's 2.5 times larger? Actually, maybe I'll stay zoomed in so you can see the change, because we need to go back to 20. Okay. This is something I guess it didn't exist before, and I never used it much. I've been using this a whole lot more lately, and I know that it's in the next version of the software, so let me just mention this. Some of the tools that you're looking for, you can, and I'm sure you know this, but you hold the right mouse button down, and you've got some choices here. And select all is one of those. It'd be the same thing as going up to edit, select all, or using the power selector and selecting all. You know, several different ways that we can select everything if we're saying I want to select everything in the design file. Okay, so let's scale those back down. So what's our factor now?
To go back.
Yeah, to go back to 20.
1 divided by 2.5.
So it's 0.4. So like 50 divided by 20, I guess. Is that the same thing? Yeah, okay. 0.4. So I hit OK. And so now I've got 20 scale cells. So I'm going to switch this back to 20. Bing's, that's what I'm going to use. And keep in mind here, this is just like the strip map file. This is not the sheets file. So this, at this point in time, means absolutely nothing. This is just a visualization for me to work right now. Does that make sense? That all I'm doing, everything that's drawn, it's a 1. In this design file, it's visualized there. Now later when we cut sheets file, and that's where ultimately you're concerned about the final look of things, the line styles and the cells. That's, when this is going to be probably most important, that you had your annotation set correctly. But usually, if you know that you're going to ultimately end up with 20 scale, I tend to just leave it set to 20 in here. Yeah, just because, well, first of all, if I was not using it, if it was 1, every line would look like that. So I just generally like to view it as it's going to be viewed on the sheets. Okay, so there's the topo. Any questions so far? I guess I've been rambling on and on. How about you guys talk a little bit or tell me your experiences or thoughts, and just give me a little break from talking for a minute.
I have a question about how when you go to a 50 scale and your text is all jumbled or it's too big, how do you deal with that? How do you get that all cleaned up?
Okay, I'm going to answer the question. Here's a good time for me to talk about something else too. Cloyd, could you talk a little bit about what you're doing with the messenger-like thing. And the reason why I say that is because, like, think about this. Think about everything we talked about in our last meeting that as newer employees, new to CAD, whatever, you're always going to have these little questions. And you say that I'm a little, I don't want to go to my team later for every single little thing. And so, or maybe you don't want to get out your desk and come walk and ask me this question, whatever it is. And by the way, know that you can come see me at any time. My job is to support you guys in CAD. Never hesitate to come ask me a question. But something like this, you'd probably all benefit from. And so what you might want to do on something like that is you might want to ask the group first, possibly. And if you do, Cloyd has a method for you guys to do that. So.
Has the answers. What Tom's talking about, I sent out a message where we have a live chat, just chat software here. It's supposed to go around and hopefully help everyone get set up. It's really easy. It's called Cisco Jabber. You click on that icon, you search for it in all menus, Jabber, Jabber, and you just put in your email, your password, and then you're on. But it's something where we can create groups. So we can create a group for this group, and we can essentially all live chat each other. It's easier than email and having these long threads of email and flooding people's email box or calling. It's a nice way to just communicate.
To me, I think about what Clay's going to set up for us. I think about it as when I started in CAD, we all sat in a circle. Like, we weren't in cubicles. You know, I don't know that I'd want to go back to that. I think everybody likes a certain amount of privacy. On the other hand, think about what it takes away from you guys. It takes away the ability for you to just turn around and say, hey, Kasani, hey, have you ever run across this where you need to scale up or down text? What do you think the best method is?
And that would be quick.
Yeah, and it'd be like that. And you'd say, and like when I was in a CAD drafting department, we had all these people here. Now, when I asked you that question, all these guys are right here, and everybody just heard the question I asked you. And now everybody knows. So to me, you're going to get the best of both worlds. You're going to stay in your private cubicle and have that sort of thing. But at the same time, you're going to turn around essentially and ask, hey, does anybody know how to do this? And you're going to do that in the form of something like, I haven't seen it yet, but I assume it's like kind of like a messenger type thing that the question's going to pop up on your screen if you choose to participate, I guess. Cool? But to answer your question, Kasani, about because with text, you don't have to use annotated text, but I would recommend it. I really like it. It takes away the guessing out of settings and things. And here's what I would do. Always know this, that no matter how your text was placed, whether it was annotated or not annotated, whatever the size is, whatever the font, does not matter. You can very, very, very quickly change it to be whatever you want it to be. And this is the steps to do it. You take and you do a select all, or select everything that you want to change. And then you go to change text attributes. Let's see, right. Well, where to go? Change text attributes right there. And I have these toolbars set up a little differently than normal, just so it works better on the screen. I'm getting to this tool. It's the same tool. Know that even if you guys are using, like, say, for instance, task, you might be coming over here, going to drawing. It's the same. I'm grabbing the same tools as what you're used to over here. If you use task, it's right there. See how when I highlighted it up here, you can have the same tool in multiple toolbars. So you can see when I selected it here, it also selected it down there. But anyway, so the name of the tool is called Change Text Attributes. And over here on the left, you see my dialog for it. And so we have something called text styles. And so I'm going to set that to 120. Let's see. Seems like something's missing here. Yeah, I wanted to. There we go. Okay, so when I change that to 20, what's nice about it is that when I'm setting up my text, I don't have to know all this information. By using annotated text styles, I almost always, there's only a handful that I use. I mainly use this roadway text 120. If you want the text to be exaggerated in size just a little bit, you might want to use the 140. There's also one for schedules, and there's one, there's a couple other fonts for like title blocks and things like that. But by far the most common one that we use is this roadway text 120. And then what I can do is I can just select most of these, and especially this one down here. See, if you have a mix of annotated text and non-annotated text, you'd want to turn this on. Because see, by highlighting this, I'm telling it I want to make all of my text annotated. Now you might want to leave justification turned off because you probably don't want to change that, but you want to change everything else. And so right now it's a 120, so let me change it to something different so we can tell it changed. Or I'll change it back maybe. Let's see, let's highlight or check these off. Yeah. I don't know if you can see that change. Now watch, I'm going to change it back to 120. And then always read your prompts down here in the lower left-hand corner. Now I've already got everything selected. And so when I do a left click in my screen, it's going to change everything that's selected. Now you might say, well, why did you select the lines and things like that? You know, I'm not doing anything to the line. That was just because it was easy to just say select everything. And I know that my text commands, when I use them, are going to have no impact on the lines. You know, anything you do in CAD, you can do several different ways. Now, when you want to deselect or unselect everything, you got a couple choices. I can either use this button right here, clear, or the one that somehow I didn't know about until just recently, and that's F4. I mean, it's unbelievable. There's 10 ways of doing everything, and it still, even after using CAD for like 25 years, man, I run across new things every day, it seems like, that I just didn't even know. Because I knew of one way of doing it. And surprisingly, I probably learned the most from you guys, from the new employees, because maybe somebody didn't teach you how to do something a certain way, like the way, this is kind of the way we've always done it. And then I'll watch what you guys are doing. I'm like, hey, wait a minute, how'd you just do that? And you figured out another way of doing the same thing.
Is there a filter that you can use? Like you select everything and then you go to a filter where you have the list of everything that you have and deselect what you want to select.
Yes, yeah, good point. Yes. Yeah. With this, what's called power, I think they call it power selector over here. It allows you to do that by expanding this out here. And what Hector was saying, I think, is, hey, is there a way that, you know, maybe I selected everything, and I do want everything selected, but a couple items. Is there any way I could take those items out of the selection set? And yes, there's a couple different ways that you could do that. One way would be to click the minus sign right here. And then it works in conjunction with the tools across the top. So individual. So you see where this is going. You know, I click the text, so let's click different color.
What I was meaning and thing is more like the list that you have right there in the left corner. So you can maybe select, for example, edge of payment and all edge of payment lines.
All edge of
go
payments.
on.
Yes, yeah, you can do that as well. Let's try that. So the other way of selecting items would be to go over here, and you've got a couple different choices. The first one is the element type. So I could say select all arcs, and any arc. Let's see, are those cleared up? Or any of the element types there. Select all cells. Okay. Or select everything that's red. Or select everything that's a weight of 2. Select everything that, like you said, is an edge of pavement.
Where is that?
Where's power selector?
Where can you find that? $500.
It's a
That's
bar.
smart already.
What about $500?
Being able to select like that.
Yeah.
So that was
Where do you find that?
element selection.
Yeah, just element selector. It brings this up, but when it brings it up by default, it's going to look like this.
Okay.
So you may not have noticed that little triangle right there. And so you've probably used it like this. And yeah, I remember when that first came out, it took me a while to even notice that triangle was there. So before that, we had this, which actually is still useful. Before this hasn't been around forever. Before that, we had this edit select by attributes. And so this mainly replaced this for the most part. But this has one thing that doesn't. And this is very useful right here. Let's say that I wanted to delete not every cell, but I wanted to delete every power pole cell, like a specific cell, not cells in general, but specific. I could go to Tools, set Select by Element, click on it, and then hit Execute, and then, just like I said, all power poles are selected. And this, I don't believe this has the ability to do that. So even though this replaced this, this still has a lot of value.
If you wanted to, let's say you're going to do a select center, and let's say you made, I think it's right there, it's symbology. Let's say I had like a bunch of circles representing a guardrail terminal. So I might have 300 in a design, in a model.
And
If I select
if you could,
all-
like when you guys ask questions, if you could, so I don't have to repeat it, and so whoever's watching this back can hear it. So, like when you ask something, you can ask it like maybe a little louder than you normally would. You'd be like, "Wait, why are you yelling?" So hopefully the microphone will pick it up.
So if I have a bunch of, if I want to select a bunch of shapes, and then I wanted to change, let's say I wanted to weight it up, or I wanted to change the color, or can I do that?
Yes.
To all of them in one?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Is it that symbology right there that I'm looking at, or that's only a level? Like let's say I didn't put them on their own level, which I maybe should have. I just want to select some of those shapes.
Just that shape. You want to select everything that's a particular shape.
Yeah.
Not necessarily a unique shape. Like when you say place a shape, we could select everything that is a shape, but not like. I don't know if this is what you're getting at, but I think you're saying. Let's say I drew this irregular shape. Are you saying, and there's multiple ones like that? Could I select everyone that looks just like that?
Well, let's say a circle. Yeah. So
Or
a little
circles.
more. Yeah, I just have.
Yes, you could select all circles.
And then change them
Yes.
all in one.
Yep. Let's see. So let's place a circle. And yeah, even if they're different sizes, it wouldn't matter. So I could select those up, and then I could say, whoa, wait a minute, I don't want to replace those, I want to wait all this up. So as long as it's selected, when you change your attributes, it'll affect everything that's selected, regardless of how you selected it.
It's another 500 hours.
Yeah. Oh, so that's why you want training. I get it now,
The
right?
array wouldn't work for that?
What was that?
The array or command wouldn't work for that?
Array.
Which command
Oh,
was that?
already.
Oh,
I don't think I even know.
array would be if that's something a little bit different. I think what Tina's talking about is more of the placement of the cell. Where's somewhere there's a tool that says. I'd have to bring all the tools out and find it. I don't really use that one too much,
Where you
but
can place a bunch of them at once?
yeah,
Along the
I could say,
path.
yeah,
Oh.
I could say, okay, I want to place
Specify
that,
on a path.
and I want to place that
Oh, I know
cell.
what you mean.
I want to
Yeah.
place 100 of these
Got it.
5 feet apart, and
Yeah,
it
this-
places them in an array. Yeah.
Yeah, this example is a little different. 'Cause it's all over the district, so it's
Oh, so what's your example? You're working on what, a guardrail project? or
yeah,
what?
it's a guardrail project, and so like just the terminals, they're signified. Terminal ends are signified by just a circle, essentially around the GIS point. So it's all over the district, hundreds of them. And if I wanted
get you.
to weight it up, down, or whatever, I didn't know that there was a select similar tool like that. So I used to do that in AutoCAD Civil 3D, but like I was searching online in Bentley and I couldn't find anything that definitively said, yeah, just do this. And you can select similar. They were talking about coding and putting in some macro thing and
Yeah.
in Bentley.
Oh,
You cry.
I was like, yeah, I can't do it.
okay. So you have your topo now. As far as the order of things, there's not an absolute order. So I'm going to give you like the steps, but some things, yeah, you have to follow the steps, but some, whether I, some things that I like to do when setting up a project, for example, is I find it valuable to overlay the aerial view. And I think it's a good practice to put the aerial view in its own file rather than bring it into the topo file, because then you reference this and it comes with it, and it takes longer to get into the file. There's a lot of reasons why it's much better to put your image in its own design file. So that's something that I would probably do early in setting up a project, just to kind of get myself set up. I also need the alignment, so I could do that next. So the next couple things we do, the order of these is not necessarily critical that you do the work in this exact same order. But most likely, most of the time, I would need the alignment. I want the alignment. And so for the alignment, we use Geopak today. Geopak is what's going away. We're using MicroStation, which is strictly like CAD, as in like CAD, like 1D, computer-aided drafting. It's not computer-aided design. There's no automation of drafting in MicroStation. MicroStation is like just this basic platform for just dumb elements. There's no intelligence necessarily to what it is. Really, the most intelligence that we have in this basic drafting environment is the fact that edge of pavement has a line style. There's 7 standard line styles, or it has custom line styles that were made for IDOT. And it has a weight and a color and a level. And that's about the most intelligence it has. Maybe it geographically or geospatially, it's, this intersection was surveyed according to a particular coordinate system. And not to get crazy with that. That's going to become much more important for you a little bit later in modeling. In fact, you don't even really have to set a coordinate system, but maybe let me just I'll try to do this like real quickly. I don't want to get crazy with this. But this is something that's going to become very important to you in the future. It seemed less important because Brad took care of this for us in the past. And you should probably know that the Earth is round, of course. Right?
It's not flat.
And so you have to think about that. The Earth is a sphere. We don't work on a sphere necessarily, right? We're working on a plane. We're working on a design plane. When I zoom out, I see about the whole state of Illinois, and it almost appears that we're pretending like the Earth is flat, right? And so the flat Earth, geospatially speaking, that's referring to what they call a projected coordinate system. Think of it this way. If you took the Earth, if I had the Earth as a sphere, and can I see your notepad for a second? Imagine this. I saw a picture of this that completely made this clear to me for once. Act like I have a globe. I'm going to put it underneath this tablet. Imagine that there's a light right in the middle of that globe. And when that light shines in on the Earth, there's lines that represent the roadway or whatever it is. When that light shines through, it hits that wherever it is on that sphere. It hits that line and projects it to the flat surface. And so that's why you'll hear terminology mostly in the future, because this becomes much more important in GIS and all the geospatial tools that we're starting to use, including modeling. And the coordinate system becomes very important because you're getting data from all these different sources. Let's say you get data from a utility company. Right, for all these years, we've had utility companies mark up hard copy plans, and we drafted in the utilities. Well, utility companies are now going out with GPS devices and picking up their utilities and giving us GIS files. So now we've got to bring those into CAD. Well, there's probably 1,000 different coordinate systems, and some of those are geographic coordinate systems and some are projected coordinate systems. And that's okay, as long as you know what their coordinate system is and you know what your coordinate system is. The system can account for that, and so when you bring something in, it will lay it right on top of where it goes. Because if you get those coordinate systems wrong, you'll get those utilities, or you'll get whatever it is. It's going to be off in Africa or something. It's going to be like off in space somewhere. It's not going to fall where it needs to fall. So in the state, in the work that we do in the state of Illinois, IDOT uses like 2 primary coordinate systems, and then there's some variations of those, like different datums that they use. And the 2 primary ones, it's a projected system, which is flat, and it is also there's also what they call an east zone and a west zone. District 6 is completely in the west zone, with the exception of like a little sliver over by Pana, I think, in Christian County. Other than that, and that makes it really easy for us to know that if anybody asks you what coordinate system you're working on, you can say, I'm working on the Illinois State Plane Coordinate System West Zone. And then from that West Zone, you'll hear like NAD 183 or terms like HARN 2011. And these are like all these little tweaks. I think the first one was like in the 1929 or something. And over the years, as technology increases, these datums become more accurate, for one. And 2, believe it or not, the Earth actually changes. And Brad Duzan, the surveyors, just explained this to me. To me, this is very interesting. Is like if you were in California, the land actually changes like a considerable amount, like from year, like maybe, don't quote me on this, but I'm going to say like 1 to 3 inches or something like this. Whatever it is, it's not a lot relatively, but it's like this small amount, and that becomes much more important with them. In the Midwest, it's very, very minor. Maybe it's an inch over 50 years or something. I don't know exactly what it is, but I know it's minimal. But even though it's minimal, you'll keep seeing all these coordinate systems. Let me show you real quick. And I probably shouldn't have even gone off on this tangent, as important as it is. We want to get through developing a class, and using the old system, this is not extremely important to you because you probably wouldn't have had to have set this. Using modeling, it's very important. Every job, you have to tell the design file, I'm working in a particular coordinate system. The reason why it's so important is because we're going to give this electronic data to construction, and in construction, the contractors are going to use AMG, automatic machine guidance systems, and they need to know that the model that we're producing, that we're giving to them, what coordinate system, so that it's, when it's placed in the field, it's, of course, in the right geospatial location. I'm getting way off track. In any case, here's how you set it. Geographic coordinate system. I'm clicking right there. You can see my favorite is, this is ours, NAD 183, west zone in feet. Let's see, let me see. But now I'm looking at this, but know that there's different variations of this, and so you'd also once you really get into modeling, just don't worry about this now. And I'm going to try not to get into modeling too much right now, but know in the future that you always need to ask Brad. You always need to know. It becomes very important in the future what coordinate system that the job was surveyed. And it's going to be some variation of the Illinois State Plain West Zone coordinate system. And see, we just talked about geographic coordinate systems versus projected coordinate systems. You know, geographic, lat long, takes into account the sphere. You know, using GIS, everything's gone to the web. They use Web Mercator. It's worldwide. You know, it makes sense not to be a projected system. It's a geographic coordinate system. If I was to get a projected, you can see all over the world that there's, you know, thousands of coordinate systems. I'm going to go to North America, United States, Illinois, and you see that there's a ton of both metric and English coordinate systems. And you're going to find that there's like maybe 3 or 4. See, there's Harn, 1983 Harn, West Zone. You're going to find multiple versions of it. Because what we're doing here, we're not using AMG. We're not producing a model for the contractor to run their equipment off. So it's in the legacy Geopak, it's kind of a non-issue. So I'm going to try to get back on track. Although everything I just said is important. So take it however you want it, I guess. It's important in the future. And being you guys are new employees, you have a long future. So it'll be a big part of your career. Okay, let's move on to the next thing I would do. I received topo. Next thing, I'm going to plot my alignment. Because in Geopak, everything that's done, when I'm talking about storing points and profiles and chains and all these things, these are not CAD. This is not in the design file. What I'm talking about is not computer-aided drafting, right? Geopak works outside of this environment. Geopak works, it has one file in particular that I'd refer to as like the brain of Geopak. And we're going to write to and pull from this file. That's the GPK file, the Geopak file, the number one most important file in Geopak. And there will be, when Brad gave you your survey, in addition to the surveys folder, he gave you topo, alignment, and 10. In addition to that, he's going to give you, for your use, a copy of the GPK file. He's also going to have his original copy in the surveys folder, and that's read-only. You know, he obviously doesn't want anybody to have access to that, because it's his responsibility to preserve that, that data. And so if anything goes wrong in your file, it's kind of on you, but know that something that was existing, maybe not proposed, but existing, you could always go back to Brad's original GPK file. So binary file, it stores points, lines, curves, chains, everything that's in Geopak. And what we're going to be doing, when I'm talking about plotting the alignment in Geopak, not modeling, when I talk about plotting the alignment, what I'm talking about is I'm visualizing the alignment from the GPK file. Does that make sense? Now that changes. Modeling, there's no Geopak, there's no GPK file. The DGN element in the design file is the surveyed alignment. It is, if you make a change to that alignment, you just essentially did the equivalent of going into the GPK file and you changed it. So it's kind of scary, actually. It's a little dangerous. There's many reasons why they did what they did. It gives you so much, but it also introduces the element of screwing things up. But there is a way to lock it down. But in this case, no problem. You screw up your alignment in CAD, means nothing, because it's only a visualization. Right here in the GPK, this is where it's at. So even though in the surveys folder, the fact that you might say, well, Brad, a lot of people don't realize this. They'll say, well, Brad gave me the alignment, and here it is. And he actually has it. I'll reference it instead of opening it here. And you'll see that Brad plotted it here. And everybody thinks that's the alignment. No, that's not the alignment. Brad visualized the alignment from the GPK file. And you're going to do the same thing. You're not going to use Brad's file that he visualized for the same reason why what we talked about in the topo file. Brad doesn't know what scale you're going to be working at. In the alignment in this version of software, you have to know what scale that you're going to be working at. And so what Brad does is, and let me open that up, but let me actually get into our file. I'm going to reference it. Did I open it? There we go. Okay, we're going to visualize the alignment in its own file. Now, you guys are probably going to notice, if you're in older jobs, that alignment might have been visualized in the topo file. We did that for a long time. Over the last few years, we kind of got away from that and started using the alignment file. The new stuff is going to have us use a separate alignment file. So lots of reasons why, going forward, you would want the alignment in its own file, not in the topo file. Although if it's already in the topo file and it's working for you, feel free to leave it. But you get a new job, new survey, definitely always keep the alignment in its own file. And I'll show you why here in a second. So before I visualize the alignment from the GPK file, I'm going to go to reference file, and just to show you guys Brad's. And there's one reason why you would want to look at Brad's visualized alignment, and that's because he names it, and you're going to want to know what names that he used. So I'm going to path out in my reference files to surveys, alignment, and so there it is. Now notice how large that text is. That's a 500 scale. That's because he knows, he's like, I have no idea what you're going to need. I just want to visualize this thing. I know you're going to replot it yourself. So he plots it at a very large scale so you can see it from a distance. What you're going to be looking for here is this. That's the chain name. You're going to want to know what, because when you get into the GPK file, you're going to see multiple chains. Like there's another one. You're not going to know which one that you need. So you probably want to reference this if for no other reason, just to know that. Also, in some cases, I don't know that we show this so much anymore. Historically, we always showed the deflection angle, and that's not something that comes from Geopak. So that's something, if you want to get that deflection instead of, if you choose to include it in your plans, I don't know. For the resurfacing plans, for years, I haven't included it. I can't tell you if it's absolutely needed or not. Nobody's ever complained when I did not include it. And if they ever absolutely wanted to know what that deflection is, if they had the CAD files, they could go in and measure it, But that might be a reason why you want to reference in Brad's file, if you chose to copy that text in like some people do. So no hard and fast rule on that. Okay. I'm going to unvisualize, I'm just going to turn off that reference file of Brad's. Okay, so here's what I need to do. I want to visualize that chain. I know it's E001, and there was a crossroad that I guess I didn't zoom into is S00 or S017. So here's how I'm going to do that. First of all, most likely you're going to be using multiple scales. And although everything else is annotated that we've been talking about, the alignment stationing is not annotated. And for that reason, you have to plot the alignment into two models. So we're going to plot a 20 scale and a 50 scale, just because that's the most common. And so what I'm going to do is, do you guys all know about what a model is as it pertains to like a DGN file? I'll tell you, if not. So we're in a CAD file. We're in a DGN file. Well, within a DGN file, you can have multiple design files within the same design file. And those are referred to as models, which the terminology is used maybe a little bit different than, I'm not referring to a terrain model. So maybe, that terminology can confuse people sometimes, the fact that it's called a model. Think of it more like I can have multiple design planes within one DGN file, if that makes sense. It's kind of like how when you're in a file and you can reference another file to it and switch back and forth. Kind of like that, but it's within the same design file. And so I'm going to want a 20 scale and a 50 scale. And here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to take the default model. I'm going to right click and say copy. And I'm going to say 20 scale. Okay, so now I'm sitting in the 20 scale model, not the default, right? And so I'm going to go ahead and plot this. And maybe sometime, Hector, we can stop. I probably don't want to. I was just thinking about the reason why we're able to cover so much material and cover it like very quick and not have you guys going crazy with notes or anything is probably because we're recording everything and you can play back everything and stop it and pause it. So I want to make sure that the recording's working.
Yeah,
so,
exactly.
yeah. Let's let me. What we're talking about. Let's just check.
Press Control
So that
Control Alt,
Control Alt E.
and you can pause it.